Up next, Authentically Detroit sits down with Richard Feldman to discuss the groundbreaking United Auto Workers strike. But first, this week's hot take from Bridge Detroit. Meet the Democrat blocking Michigan abortion bills. She says she's not alone, and tax reform, tenants' rights, bus discounts. What's next for Sheffield's People's Bills? Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages.
Hey, it's Stephen Henderson from WDET and Bridge Detroit. If you love listening to Orlando and Donna's incisive interviews and conversations on the Authentically Detroit podcast, I hope you'll also listen to the podcast I host, Detroit Today from WDET on Detroit's NPR station. Detroit Today is a daily podcast where I talk with community leaders, elected officials, and residents of Detroit, the region, and the state about politics and the values that animate our communities. Listen to Detroit Today every day on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, y'all, it's Orlando. We just want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast episode are those of the co-hosts and guests and not their sponsoring institutions. Now, let's start the show. Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Cast Corridor at the WDET studios. We are content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Givens-Davidson.
Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. Donna and I are joined today by former auto worker, longtime community and labor activist, and board member at the Boggs Center, Richard Feldman, to discuss the historic UAW strike. Richard, I think this is the first time we're saying this. Welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Long overdue.
Yeah, I can't believe this hasn't happened, Rich.
Right.
It's an honor to be here, and it's always a pleasure to be in the company of you, Orlando, and Donna, and ECN, and Bridge, and have a chance to talk about something very, very significant happening at the same time, filled with the opportunity that this conversation, done slowly, can mean to more of us.
Yeah. It's Monday, and it's a bit of a departure from the beautiful weekend that we've had with the sun, but the clouds are still cute. How's this blessed day finding each of you, Don? How you doing?
Doing well. We had an amazing event on Friday.
Talk about the event.
And the East Side Extravaganza was just wonderful. In my words, magical. It was so great to see the community come out, show out in their 70s gear and be celebrated. And the Larry Lee and the Back in the Day band is just the absolute best band in the city of Detroit. I don't care what anybody says. So the music was fantastic.
Was singing.
When that guy sang the LTD lead in the song, and everybody was standing there transfixed because he actually made it sound a little better than Jeffrey Osborne. And that's hard to do because he's one of my favorites. But I loved that. The vocals, I love the music. I love the thought that people put in their costumes, and you got to see people who came out who were looking young again. And I mean, seriously, they were dressing, and you could see they embraced it. And I talked to somebody who sent a message, and she says, it reminded me of my youth. And when I saw you honor Martha Reeves, it reminded me of dancing in the streets near Mack Avenue. So it was great. I was really proud of all of our awardees, and
it really was a time warp.
It was.
It really was. Like I took some photos, and it was like, is this really 2023? I mean, people were fly in throwback, though.
Yeah. Can we talk about Everett Tate for a minute?
I
did not recognize that brother, okay? He came over and spoke to me.
I had no idea that was him because we had like an ad hoc fashion show.
Right. We did.
We need to figure out what we're going to do.
No, what we knew we were going to do, we advertised we were going to do a fashion show.
Oh, okay.
We forgot to tell you that part. But we advertised we were doing a fashion show. We're going to bring people up to celebrate and show off their fashions.
And Everett walked up, And I'm like, that's every day. How long has he been? He was like, I've been here the whole time.
And he came pimping up, and then he spoke to me. I'm like, who is this? But the thing he did, because he had that walk down. He had it down. He was the
People were in character
living
too.
embodiment of his father. And when he showed a picture of his father, when his father was a young man, Odell, it brought tears to my eyes just to see that, lived out. But I mean, everybody was fantastic. Willie Mae Gaskin showed up and out with that beautiful hat on.
Mr. Song's hat. You know what I'm saying?
And
just
strutting and dancing.
Or in her words, stepping.
Keep on stepping, right? So it was a beautiful event. And I always leave that as a high. So this weekend, Kevin and I rode bikes everywhere. We were just on our bikes, just enjoying life, getting out in nature. And I've been riding bikes. I rode bike to work on Friday. And I think I'm going to do it a couple times a week. It just feels so good to be out there. Somehow it feels free to me. So that's how I'm feeling right now. It's a little chilly, but I rode my bike up to, the Rite Aid to get some medicine and rode my bike home. I'm just trying to embrace life.
I love that for you.
Especially, because as you know, I just turned 60. So
yes.
you have to start thinking about your health, and you have to start thinking about trying to preserve
There
things.
was a birthday serenade surprise
so
for you.
Amazing. It was so amazing. I got 3 singers from this amazing band serenading me and the people in the room and this cake. So I felt really special. I feel like our community is really special, and I walked away feeling joy and love. What can you do? Every year I walk away feeling joy and love. This year was even more special than the last year. And we got the food right this year, right? The food was warm and people had large enough portions.
I never get to eat. I wish I had an opportunity to eat it.
It's shocking to me that you couldn't eat. I think because you got there. I don't know, because it was there. It's supposed to be up until 8:30, but everybody who ate the food, it was large servings, warm food, lots of different. It was all very tasty. So I'm happy about that. Anyway, I could go on, but I don't want to go on too long. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing great, and I missed the extravaganza, but as I hear you talk about the 70s theme, that's so much what is the hunger for folks to come alive again in many ways. So I'm doing really well. I spent the weekend with Feed and Freedom Growers, who had an art theater activity going on Sunday, and something at Freedom Dreams as well on Saturday. So just keeping busy with the center, and my family's healthy, and that's a big thing when you're 75.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. 75.
I'm going to be like Rich when I'm 75, right?
I know, still going.
Rich is, I'm not just still going, just not missing a beat.
Not missing a beat. I cannot, man, listen. Are y'all, listen, okay. All right, it's time for Hot Takes, y'all, where we run down some of the week's top headlines in the city of Detroit. For Hot Takes, meet the Democrat blocking Michigan abortion bill. She says that she is not alone. These are by my colleagues at Bridge, Michigan, Lauren, Jonathan, and Estella Yu. The Detroit Democrat currently blocking abortion rights bills supported by Governor Gretchen Whitmer has been willing to break rank with her party before, and this time she claims she's not the only one who has concerns. Representative Karen Whitsett, a community organizer and activist first elected to the Michigan House in 2018, courted controversy among Democrats by meeting with then President Donald Trump, voting with Republicans on several key policy matters, and supporting a Republican lawmaker over a Democratic challenger during the 2020 election cycle. Now she's in the spotlight again for being the lone Democrat in the House Health Policy Committee to vote against the Reproductive Health Act, an 11-bill package of abortion access bills that has been expected to pass through the legislature with a razor-thin majority. Whitsett has taken issue with several provisions in the package, most notably allowing state Medicaid funds to be used for abortions and repealing a 24-hour waiting period between an abortion consultation and the procedure. Whitsett told Bridge, Michigan, she supports the right to an abortion and voted for Proposal 3, a ballot initiative passed last fall that codified abortion rights in Michigan after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion. But she said she believes it's not too much to ask of people seeking abortions to pay for it without Medicaid and to take their time to consider the decision. She said constituent feedback and her own experience terminating a pregnancy after a sexual assault informed her positions. Perhaps more problematic for her Democratic colleagues, Whitsett says she's spoken with 7 other members of her caucus who share her concerns. She says, if it came to the floor right now, the votes aren't there. Karen Whitsett said. So, Donna, what say you?
This is a frustrating part of Detroit politics for me, and that is the lack of clarity and accountability for people we send to Lansing and D.C. to uphold the values and needs of people. She represents one of the poorest districts in one of the poorest cities in the United States, and to say that people have to pay for abortions with their own pocketbook and that Medicaid shouldn't pay for it is a classist and elitist argument that really says, you know what, poor people, you're on your own. But she is so problematic routinely to me. And, I was looking at these beautiful pictures of the Congressional Black Caucus, and lots of people I love are there and getting honored. But I have to say, I sometimes wonder if we have any expectations or standards when we attend these events, or does everybody get celebrated because they call themselves a politician? As long as we don't set standards for the people who elect us to maintain and represent all of us equally, I have a problem. Now, she said, my conscience tells me I'm against abortion. I'd have a problem with that too, but at least it would be consistent. But to single out poor women and decide that they have to pay for it on their own, considering the state of poverty and the way that poor people can barely pay for anything on their own. Is a homeless person supposed to pay for an abortion? What if they were raped? What if they can't prove it? What about equal protection? And so I actually think it's disgusting. I did not like her comments the last time around, and I know that she says that she wants to be independent and whatever, but I think that she is not accountable to the people who elected her to office, and it needs to be held up. And I think we need to, I remember there were people who wanted to not include her on a ticket or something like that. There were even questions about whether she could be considered a Democrat. I don't really care about that, but I think that there should be electoral consequences for people who do that.
One of the questions that I constantly have is when representatives in government say they're hearing from people that this is the stance that they should take. And I feel like representatives of government should be able to quantify constituent feedback, right? Who is saying and who is pressuring her to vote this way or vote that way,
and who is paying her to vote this way?
And that's my question. Like, so show me the survey, right? Show me the mechanism, the utility that you use to draw constituent feedback around this stance, right? The other piece about this that is sort of frustrating to me is that you were elected to represent people, right? And a part of this, as she states plainly, is her representing herself and her own experience. Now, I'm not under the impression that our experiences don't influence the way we show up in the world. But when you bring that to the forefront of an issue like this, I feel like that's problematic.
I agree. I mean, and when your own experience is you had the money to do something and poor people should come up with the money also, then I have to question your humanity. Quite honestly, it's beyond upsetting to me. I think that we start talking about voter education, and a lot of times we want voters to understand they need to register to vote, and we demand they go to the polls. But without more tools for accountability, for demanding and clarifying what our expectations are of the people who represent us in Lansing, it's a free-for-all. They can do whatever they want. They can vote however they want, and then explain it later with some. And and we know that there's so much dark money in politics. We know there's so much influence by people who have a lot. But when you have a Democrat using Republican talking points and representing a city that the Republicans actually wanted to disenfranchise in 2020 and are trying to disenfranchise moving forward. In fact, the state Republican leader actually sued during the last election, saying that she thought that Detroit votes should not count because she believed that there was too much fraud inside of the city with no proof or evidence. So I think, this is a constituency of politicians that's actually hostile to the city of Detroit that she represents. I have an issue with her, and I have an issue with that decision, and I also have an issue with anybody who then treats her like an ally because she's not. And I know that there's more than, we're not a single issue state, and there's more than one issue, and maybe we can get her to vote on certain other issues, but I think we need to hold her accountable somehow.
Rich, you have anything to add? Sorry.
I would just peel back the onion a little further, that electing people that are not based on a principle of values and principles is a scam. When it's based on issues only, they can go back and forth. They can do what they want. They'll do this for this part of the constituency, that for the other. I think what I think is a challenge to all of us in this period ahead is to figure out and create with the community, with the grassroots leadership that has emerged over the last 10, 20 years in Detroit and around the state, what are the principles and values to guide elected officials? Because we're not capable of holding them accountable just whether we elect them or not, because the next one you elect is not held accountable because there's not a principles and values that they've signed on to.
But well, if you don't have specific legislation, how do you know that the principles and values are being adhered to?
I think until we create the power and the leadership and the nurturing in our communities, in our workplaces, that say this is what we want you to stand for, we get sidetracked by each issue. And we don't have a comprehensive view of what kind of city we want to create, what kind of state we want to create. And I think we just continue to open us up for policy that is very short term. Depends who wins and who loses, rather than building a movement based on principles and values.
I think the principles and values have to be the root, but I think vision has to be the process. And I think the vision is not just, I believe in justice, I believe in equity. I think the vision, I believe in equity, and therefore I support these things, has to be there, because what ends up happening too is somebody can say, I believe in equal educational opportunity and support vouchers. Somebody can say, I believe in equal education opportunity and support charters, or support disbanding the teachers union because they have decided that the best way to get there is to take these stances. I think we need a guidebook. I think we need a vision, and it needs to all be rooted in values. And I also think we need to listen to the folks in the hood, like you said, and figure out how to represent them. So it's not just us representing our friends or else people who are actively engaged in the political process. But I do think that we need more than just that. And I also think we're reactive. So somebody comes up with an idea and we react to it. And I want you to react the right way. I'm interested in being proactive and having politicians who are, moving and promoting legislation that actually is coming from the people. And Stephanie Chang does a really good job of that among a lot of our state legislators. There's others, but I'm interested in more of that.
It's also interesting to see how legislatures with thin majorities, especially Democratic thin majorities, to see who sort of rises up and becomes, the Joe Manches and Kristen Cinemas of the world, right? Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema will, stopped so much, right, because of the thin majority, and the Democrats in the state house have a thin majority. They can't afford not to have her vote, and I think some folks see that, people like her see that as an opportunity to sort of rise within the ranks, and sort of right size whatever her issue. She's had issues and clashes with the governor before. She was friendly to Donald Trump and, accepted, really, really could be devastating talking points from the Trump administration around COVID-19. It's just been, there's a history of this, so I'm not surprised. I really do think that there's something to be said about folks who hold legislation hostage like this in these thin majorities. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I think, again, that, we aren't clear what we stand for, and so we fall for anything. I want to remind people that when the state voted on things like residency, when the state voted on the reform school board, when the state voted on, many things, charter school expansion, there were a lot of members of the Detroit delegation who voted with the Republican people in this state. They did not vote alone. In fact, the Detroit delegation was being led by people who encouraged people to do certain things that were not in our interest. And from the moment that the Reform District was voted in and a board was voted in 1999, the district was placed in a financial deficit, and a lot of decisions were made that were longstanding decisions that still impact us today. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is an example of a rogue politician, and we do need to figure out what to do about these rogue politicians. I think, again, if they have to make a pledge or they have to clarify that they're running on these things, I want to ask them before they get elected, will you support A, B, C, D, or E, so that if they support A, B, C, they don't support those things, we can be clear that we're not friends. I think we do not have a roadmap around how we're going to hold people accountable. Instead, she's cool, that's my girl, he's from this good family, that's my pastor, I know him, they live down the street from me, whatever it is that comes up, they've got a great family. We have things that substitute for justice. And it's very frustrating to me because we're doing it to ourselves, or we're allowing the people we elect to do it to us.
We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back with one more story. Stick around. Rich Feldman will be with us when we return.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the Neighborhood Tech Hub, and more. Members who are residents of the East Side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit, by Detroiters, for Detroiters.
Welcome back to Authentically Detroit for hot takes, tax reform, tenants' rights, bus discounts. What's next for Sheffield's People's Bills? City Council President Mary Sheffield plans to introduce new laws aimed at improving property tax assessments, reducing bus fare for low-income riders, protecting renters, and several other measures to aid vulnerable Detroiters. It's been 5 years since Sheffield unveiled a set of policy proposals dubbed the People's Bills, which she developed in partnership with community organizations and neighborhood advocates. Sheffield, who since became the leader of council and is now considering running for mayor, celebrated legislative victories during a press conference last week and reaffirmed her commitment to achieving the full list. She says over the last 5 years, we have moved the needle from rhetoric to action with respect to addressing the social needs and issues that impact so many Detroiters. Sheffield recalled how 5 years earlier, former chief of staff in the Duggan administration warned about the potential fiscal impact of her agenda, saying the proposal should be carefully studied so as to not be an emergency manager bill. A half-off parking ticket discount for residents was expected to cost the city millions of dollars in revenue, but residents only shaved off $55,000 in fines as of last year. Sheffield says she's since proven detractors wrong. The mayor often touts the impact of items on the list of people's bills Sheffield provided, including home repair grants for seniors, property tax exemptions for low-income homeowners, and wage increases for police officers. Sheffield was joined on stage in Spirit Plaza last week by representatives from the Laborers International Union of North America, Detroit People's Platform, Coalition for Property Tax Justice, Right to Counsel Coalition, Detroit's Tenants Association, and the LCAU, amongst others. They celebrated the passage of more than a dozen of Sheffield's policy goals, including the creation of a legal aid program for low-income renters and reparations task force, resident parking ticket discounts, neighborhood improvement funding, and an industry standards board for arena workers. Sheffield said her top two priorities for the rest of the year are passing property tax reform and responsible contracting ordinances, but both proposals encounter legal hurdles. Sheffield's next step for the People's Bills include property tax reform, responsible contracting, right to renew, water affordability, and fair discount for low-income bus riders. All right, Donna, what say you?
Poverty has not improved, okay? I think that the needs and issues of poor people in our community remain strong. We were having an offline conversation.
She's a politician.
I understand. I understand. She's even taking credit for tax abatements for low-income homeowners, and I'm pretty sure that state legislation that she did not pass. But I would do that too. I'd throw in things I didn't do, things that happened and didn't happen, and things didn't happen enough. the reality is we were talking, and Rich made a comment about us sometimes we're responding to single issues and not to root causes, right? And I really want to hear your thoughts on that. But I've had conversations with Mary and others about, the existence of the Downtown Development Authority and maintaining it as it is, because it's siphoning money away from all of the things that could benefit residents. If you really want to make a big impact on the city, figure out a way to restructure the Downtown Development Authority so that all of those new property taxes downtown are not restricted for use downtown, but can be used to support the general fund. We're paying police officers more, and when they show up downtown, they're showing up in a place that has its own police force, number one, and this downtown area is not contributing to the Detroit General Fund. They're not showing up in the hood like they should. I mean, maybe they are in other people's hoods, but I'm going to tell you, they're right down the street from ECN, and it took them 15, 20 minutes to get to our building after we had somebody drive into our building. So that's just one example, but I've heard many more from other people about, the lack of support, police support inside of neighborhoods. It's interesting to me that those are the public servants also who get the support. And also, we have people like, I think the city council just vote to defend Chief Craig, our Republican friend who believed in disenfranchising black voters in Detroit. Didn't they just in a lawsuit? And isn't the city still antagonizing people from Detroit will breathe? So when I look at this, it's like throwing a whole lot of things at the board, seeing what's going to stick, and really not doing anything to change the lived experience of poverty in our community.
What do you think her strategy and positioning, what do you think this is worth? Like she held a press conference, it's 5 years. She's positioning the people's bills as like on track for what is her strategy behind that?
I mean, she talks about property tax reform, and we know that the mayor is trying to push a land value tax reform in Lansing. Is that in keeping with the land value tax, or is that something that's separate? I think those are the kind of questions that we need answered. And there are a lot of questions about the land value tax. I don't
even think this council understands that split rate tax stuff. Yeah.
Someone called me up and they were like, "Oh, listen, Don, I need you to read these bills so that you can understand what's in them." I read those bills and I still don't understand what's in them.
And we're not.
I read the legislative policy.
We're smart.
I like to think I'm smart too. Then I read the legislative policy analysis and I still couldn't understand some basic principles. And the problem with laws like that is when they get passed, it's the stuff that you don't understand that comes back to bite you in the behind. And so I think, making sure that we get a legal analysis, I'm hoping that the Citizens Research Council of Michigan gets on it. But it sounds good to care about poor people. But if you care about poor people, then what you have to do is you have to challenge a system that prioritizes and enriches rich people.
I really want to get in the weeds on this a little bit, and I know we're pressed on time. And so for you just said you have to have a policy that challenges a system that continues to benefit the wealthy. Let's talk about Mary Sheffield. Do you believe that she does that? Has she been doing that? Are the people's bills her answer for this?
I think the people's bills sound really good. I think the devil is in the details. I think, are these the most impactful things that could be done with her office at a time where we still see the kinds of things that we see happening, at a time where the Illiches seem to have unlimited time to develop properties and get tax abatements when they keep missing deadlines, at a time where Dennis Kefalanos is giving these extensions? There's really no accountability for the industrialists who operate inside of our community at a time we see truck traffic moving where it is. I say, if you're not doing things that are really, really challenging the way things are in the structure of our community, you're not doing enough. Now, I'd be happy to talk to Mary about those things, but I've been trying to meet with her for over a month, and she told me we could meet, and we still haven't met. So I can't talk to her. I hope she listens, or somebody listens so they can let her know. If you want to be taken seriously, then you have to explain to the constituency what you're going to do. And I don't think it's going to be an easy fight if she wants to run for mayor, if she cannot be a little bit more impactful and addressing the concerns that I'm hearing from residents every single day about what they want. Rich, what are your thoughts?
So I'm smiling because, I guess Sean Fain from the OEW has been successful with this stand-up strike and the energy and 50,000 people listening to his recent Facebook Live thing on Friday. And President Biden is coming to Detroit,
coming,
right?
yeah.
And
he
so
was going to send
maybe
reps, but they said
no. So maybe Sheffield will listen to you and come to a discussion. What I want to say is, and a lot of the particular policies, I know generally I don't understand the specifics. I haven't studied them specifically. But the analogy I want to make is that Detroit, and I think you have to name what time it is in Detroit. Detroit is at the time that I think is similar to what it was when people talked about the, quote, closing of the frontier in 1890, when U.S. settler colonialism had finished the physical genocide of indigenous people. And for the next 50, 60, 70 years, we have the continued cultural genocide until the uprisings of AIM and then Standing Rock. And I think Detroit is at a time that we are seeing the gentrification on a level beyond anything we could have imagined 20 years ago. And they are pushing everybody out of the way to get control of that water for international trade, for international movement, not only for better, fancy restaurants or fancy houses on the water, but it's about power and it's about the resource of why Detroit matters to the world, of the fresh water. And I think we also have had for the last 10, 15 years an amazing upsurge of leadership in every community across the city, showing that there's another vision, another imagination of what a city can be. And it has to include the 40% of the people that make under $25,000. And it has to be stop believing in either the corporations or the city to resolve our problems. And we see it every day in many, many community houses and movement across the city.
Can I ask you guys both this question? And I know we got to move on, but this is really interesting to me. I'm thinking about the comms strategy that Mary Sheffield often employs, right? Even around the People's Bill, she had a presser and she's with these groups. And I'm thinking about the way she shows up on major council votes and some of the things that she says. Nobody else on council is really talking the way like Mary is talking, right? To the naked ear, it seems like she is a champion, for the people. Is it real? Is it for show? Is it the wrong strategy? Where is the mismatch?
I think that we have such little activism coming out of city council that she sounds good, right? And I don't mean that as a put down. I just think that we don't have enough activism that's coming out of city council, period. I think the district council construct that you're going to get better representation actually means that each city council person represents their hood and nobody's really representing the city as a whole. We don't have enough eyes on the city as a whole. So it feels as though there's actually less accountability rather than more. When you have city council people like in District 3 running almost unopposed, then, we know that if they were running citywide, they would have to get more votes than just the few people who show up at the polls. I think that what Rich is talking about, the 40% who earn less than $25,000 a year, is a significant conversation because these are people who frequently don't vote because they don't feel represented. And we got to get them to the polls with ideas and a vision so that they can understand that even though they don't feel represented, that they can be represented if they are being heard and their needs are being prioritized. Because a lot of times we keep things in a different direction. I also want to just, another thing that irritates me, the water affordability thing. And who's doing what on water affordability? I'll tell you who's trying to do something. Stephanie Chang at the state Senate is introduced a bill to charge all water customers $2 a month on their water bill to help fund a water affordability plan that reduces the cost for people who are low income. Similar to the way that we provide a source of funding for people who have difficulty paying their energy cost. I'm not sure it's a perfect bill, but you know what? It's something. And it's a way to keep, revenue streaming in because after ARPA ends, there's not going to be any revenue to support the Lifeline program or other programs. I think you're seeing a lot of innovation coming at that level. In city council, I see reaction to the mayor, I see passivity, and I also see that the city council's role has really been shrunken by the creation of all of these authorities. So I'd like to have a full conversation on that, and maybe, Rich, you can come back and we can talk about the structure of government and why all of these authorities are anti-democratic and why it's important that we preserve and re-empower the people of the city of Detroit. And the final thing is I also want to agree with you that government's not going to save us, and corporations are certainly not going to save us, but we can save government, and we can hold corporations accountable if we work collectively to define what we want our future to look like. And yes, there are things that are happening in different parts of the neighborhood, and I love it. We gave an award to Mark Covington, a man I really admire. But Mark Covington used to have livestock, and he now has moved a lot of them off because we don't have a livestock ordinance. And so there's limits to what people can do on their own. We can't put in community solar without changes in policies and laws. I would like to see us really create the kind of framework that supports what's happening on a local level. I know we got to go on, but those are just some things I wanted to say.
All right, we got Rich Feldman here to talk about the UAW strike. And there's, Rich, we talked about it a little bit last week. There is a lot of discussion about it. There is a lot of support, and there is some surprising dissent around the current UAW strike and the Big Three. Give us just a baseline understanding of how we got here.
Thank you. And I have the honor of having spent 20 years on the assembly line at Ford Michigan Truck, which is now Michigan Assembly, which is the Ford plant that's on strike. So I spent a little time out there, picket line with folks recently. And then I spent 10 years out there as the plant chairman, and then about 10 years with the International Union. I think while the excitement that is uplifted people is similar to the conversation that says, we see you. For the first time in decades and decades and decades, a leadership has said, we see the workforce, we're going to have open dialogue, we're going to be on social media, and it matters to people. People feel proud that someone is watching and they are being seen and being accountable. How did we get here? I think it's always a question how far you want to go back, and I want to go back to. We'll go back with the closest part. The closest part was the International Union went through a period of massive corruption. A large number of them ended up in jail, and people were really, really separated. That was sort of something that broke the back because it was so obvious what took place. And here comes a leadership that says, we're going to be accountable. We're going to be seen. You can see what we're doing. We're going to be in communication. Sean was on the picket line right after Friday's announcements, going around to different shops. So he's there. The second thing is, this is a response to what took place with the economic collapse. Some people call it the Great Recession. I think it's a false understanding of what took place. From 1980, with the rise of not just Reagan, but the response to the rebellions in the 60s and the end of the U.S. empire in the 70s. I want to emphasize that the U.S. empire, no longer by 1980 was the U.S. the only country making cars. We now had massive competition. We had massive automation. We had massive displacement. Everything can be built anywhere in the world. You didn't have to be a U.S. company anymore. So I want to go back to that changing moment. The 1980s was more than just Reagan firing the traffic control workers. Okay, while that was a major piece, what it triggered was the rise of the counter-revolution. And I want to use the word counter-revolution because that's what we're experiencing with Trump some 40 years later, is a counter-revolution. Not just a Republican who's a conservative, who's dangerous, who's rotten. They represent trying to go back to when the world was another time. So the UAW, when the Great Recession, which is to me the end of what some folks would call neoliberalism, because it's the end of a period in capitalism, of racial capitalism, because it collapsed. The system is under collapse. And during that period, corporations said, we're going to go bankrupt unless you give us all this money and paybacks. So the UAW, in an attempt to hold on to jobs, which made sense, they gave back concessions, way too many, but that's what they had to do to keep in business. And they lost COLA, they lost pensions, they lost wages, they created a two-tier system. So some people work 6 years, 8 years at almost half pay until they get to the the base pay. So this strike is an expression of saying enough is enough. Since we helped you out in 2008, 2010, it's now your time to give back some of the billions and billions and billions of dollars that you got from the profits that we allowed you to get. So we're now seeing the workers saying, I'm here, I want to be seen, I want my fair share, and that's what it's about.
We're going to put a pin right there. We're going to take our last break of the show. We'll be right back with Rich Feldman.
Have you always dreamed of being on the airwaves? Well, the Detroit Eastside Engaged Podcast Network, or DEEP for short, is here to make that dream a reality. Located inside the Stoudemire, the DEEP Network offers studio space and production staff to help get your podcast idea off the ground. Doesn't take a whole lot of work to get started. Just visit the Authentically Detroit page at ecn-detroit.org or call Sarah at 313-948-0344.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the neighborhood tech hub, and more. Members who are residents of the east side have access to exclusive services in the wellness network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
All right, we are back here at Authentically Detroit with Rich Feldman. Donna, you're getting ready to ask a question.
Well, I was getting ready to just talk about some of the narratives that were produced also in the 1980s and the 1990s around sort of this neoliberalism actually grew muscle in this time period. The financial institutions were deregulated. You ended up having a lot of support given for, you had the NAFTA agreement that was passed, and this was under, a Democratic president, the free trade agreement, which actually helped facilitate even more offshoring of jobs and opportunity and less regulation.
Crime bills.
You had crime bills and this demonization of workers, right? Mm-hmm. Workers were the problem. Workers were lazy, incompetent. Workers were greedy and demanding too much, and workers were responsible for destroying the economy, and therefore we had to reduce workers because they were a drag on our economy, and we couldn't compete with other nations. This is the narrative that was produced. But one of the interesting things that also happened, and I say interesting, and I don't mean really interesting, terrible things that also happened, was the growth of this, $10, $20 million income kind of stuff. And the use of the stock market and manipulation of stock to enrich a company and enrich the shareholders by stock buybacks and the like, where Mary Barra gets most of her income not from, salary. She gets most of her income from these, the stock dividends. And this is not true in most nations that produce cars. In most nations that produce cars, people aren't making these outsized salaries. So not only did workers see their wages relatively decrease, but the wealthiest people had huge increases. The other thing is that we started using terms like makers and takers. And Mary Barra was the maker, and the auto workers were the takers. And it's the absolute opposite. The makers are the auto workers, and the takers are those people who are enriching themselves at the expense of working conditions, at the expense of the consumer who has to pay. Just the cost of cars has just escalated to a ridiculous price where average people cannot pay. You talk about the cost of rent, the cost of automobiles is also going up. And then in our own backyard, because, I'm always going to talk about Stellantis negatively because they're right in our community and they're a terrible corporate citizen, polluting our community. And that's a problem. But in addition to them polluting the community, their workers are inside and their health is also at risk. In fact, if what they're releasing inside is a problem, just imagine what other people are breathing inside. And that's not to talk about other workplace safety issues that I've heard union members speak of recently. I believe we had a union, somebody who's running for a union position on last year who talked about some of the health conditions. Can you talk about some of those things, about the narratives and how you see those narratives returning to support workers as opposed to the corporate class, the 1%?
I think if I hear what you're saying is after this, with the community benefits agreement or disagreement that actually took place a few years ago, we saw a company basically at one point and the union host a meeting of almost 1,000 people. Within 3 months, because of the way the community benefits agreement is city formulated, led to very few people being there eventually. Mm-hmm. And it allowed the company to get away with not telling the truth about how much money they were getting. It allowed the company to ignore the concerns of pollution, and both air pollution as well as transportation pollution through the neighborhoods. And there were some folks from like the Detroit
People's Platform
who were involved and continue to be involved in the struggle. And there were some union folks that were involved. But essentially the community benefits agreement did not deal with what the community needed other than jobs. And that's the consistent difficulty. So while the union got what they wanted in terms of the workers, in terms of the jobs, and in terms of the challenge from they're challenging the state to deal with the pollution. We're in this quagmire because in many ways, and this is not an answer to your question, unfortunately, but in many ways, unions have spent more time trying to get along with the company until this new moment in this new administration saying, we're going to stand up for what your needs are for whether it's health and safety in the plant or health and safety outside the plant. And what I want to see is solidarity mean that the union, this is the next step, that the union is expressing solidarity with the community, right, so that I'd like to see 100 or 200 Local 7 union workers go out and support the struggle against pollution in the community. Not just the union saying, come to my picket line, which I think is valuable and important. But solidarity is a long-term strategy. It's not a one-term event. And I think that Sean and the administration is laying the basis for that conversation to take place. And that's a good thing. But we have to be pushing that from the neighborhood forward.
I agree. Jerry King, who is a union rep, has been very active at ECN and with A. Philip Randolph Institute in supporting some community awareness and education so that we find out about violations. He was actually one of the chair of the Neighborhood Advisory Council that led to this. But we know that this process was actually not led. It's supposed to be a negotiation between a corporation and the community. But instead, it was the city who was leading this negotiation and acting on behalf of Stellantis and not on behalf of the community. It's disgusting to me that the city would not play a neutral role to find out what the community wanted, but the city was selling the community, something that really the community didn't even have time to evaluate because there was a 6-week process, which is ridiculous. They put us on a timeline. And then when the agreement was reached with
that silence, neighborhood institutional organizations like ECN and the local business economy in neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, so what the city has been very good at is saying to residents, you don't need people like ECN. We'll take care of you. Just ignore them. They try to be in charge, and you're as smart as they are, and you're as good as they are, somehow separating us. I actually listened to Ron Stallworth at a meeting explaining that that Stellantis had been in the community much longer than any of the community organizations that were here to represent the community. That kind of divisive behavior is, very destructive.
It's also false.
It creates all kinds of false narratives. I mean, you're in the community. What do? First, you're not headquartered in the community. Secondly, I know they're talking about closing their Auburn Hills headquarters.
What happened? Anybody ever asked this question? What happened to the foundation?
The foundation. The foundation is a political tool that they use to punish people who talk back, who don't follow. I mean, they're so punitive. I actually sat in a meeting with people they did not like, and they decided they weren't going to speak to me anymore. I think that's, and the city allows this. The city allows them to not show up at city council meetings and still carries their water. Because the city's mindset is jobs, 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 jobs. Well, since Detroit has been an industrial powerhouse, and that's the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, industry has come over health, over people for over a century. We have got to demand that people matter. And again, if we are dealing with these health consequences, people who are working in those plants are dealing with health consequences. I think one way to get at solidarity is for workers to understand it's not just us. You're breathing the air we are, and you're breathing it in an indoor environment where it's not mixing with fresh air. We know that there are health consequences to working in these kinds of environments. And so, why are we still using toxic paint? Why are we still using some of these toxic processes to protect workers and the community? They're not separate from us. Either workers live in this community that is being contaminated or they don't, right? But if they do live there, then they're getting it while they're at work and they're getting it when they're at home. And it's not just Detroit, it's all over the state. It's a behavior of these corporations, but in the city of Detroit, you have a higher concentration of these wasteful, toxic practices adjacent to where people live.
So part of it is you asked, how did we get to this place? And I know this is a long journey. We got to this place because the fundamental contradiction in U.S. history, going way back when, is the contradiction between believing that economic and technological answers are more important than human and social values. Take a minute to think about that. Mm-hmm. That's the principles and values upon which this country was built. That's the contradiction it was built, and we have been struggling against that and trying to create one that says the social and human values and political engagement of a new kind of democracy is what we have to create that puts economics and technology at our service rather than I'm willing to trade my life and make my life for the dollar. I'm willing to work whatever overtime comes up as fast as I can because that's the only way I can get into this way of life.
Right.
I'm willing to trade my life for the dollar.
And I'm willing to sacrifice yours.
And I'm willing to sacrifice yours. I'm even willing to sacrifice my own.
But more so, I'm willing to sacrifice yours.
Yes.
I really want to get at this.
Push that.
I think it's important for us to understand that racial capitalism was genocide against Native Americans, was genocide against Africans, was genocide against people who were coming here and working in the United States and forced to work under slave conditions. And it was horrible to white people who were not rich. It caused widespread pain. But I want us to always remember the genocidal component of this, that you had to have race and you had to be willing to sacrifice the lives, not of one or two, but of millions of Native Americans and millions of Africans. And before that, racial capitalism was in China selling opium and forcing people to work on opium farms and forcing in China people to produce this. We've got to get to the point where all lives matter in ways that are beyond a slogan. We've got to get to a point where Black lives matter, where brown lives matter, and where workers matter. But what ends up happening is a worker gets told, we're doing these things because this is the greatest nation on earth, and you're lucky to be a member of the greatest nation of earth and to work here, unlike these losers right here, who we therefore feel justified in harming because somehow we have dehumanized them. I don't know that the economic structure is so broken, and I think the theories of change are so broken. How do you fix a system? How do you fix a nation? They killed off all of the Native Americans. No, they did not all get smallpox and die. How do you fix a nation that imported people who were slaves unless you are willing to confront these truths and saying we're willing to change and we are willing to make some type of reparations? And right now, as much as we have all of these problems here, we know that we offshore so much injustice in so many ways all through the world, in those protectorates or whatever they are in the United States we don't even talk about, but American Samoa and in the Bikini Islands, in places where we drop bombs and just completely destroy the environment.
See, what we do is we create, because we deal with the grievances and the concern, and rightly so, we're finally saying we got to get beyond fossil fuels, right? But the answer is, how do we get more cobalt and lithium out of Africa, or out of the Congo, and out of indigenous homes?
Right.
Which creates another contradiction, but is built on the same thing of extraction, rather than saying, how do we create a different kind of transportation? And I'm not saying that's the UAW's job to do that. It's all of our jobs to say what kind of society, what kind of city. And Detroit has been a place where vision and struggle and being seen has always been part of who we are. And
I'm also seeing us struggle with this as a nation. I think we are in really a crucial point in our nation's history right now, because a lot of the problems that you all are surfacing are formative problems that are at the very core of the country's origins, right? And so what I am observing just from a broad stroke, a national level, are these tensions from every side sort of coming to a head. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think I'm fearful of what's going to happen. But I mean, if we even draw back out, the labor market, I mean, the railroad strikers, the UPS strikers, the UAW strikers, the writer's strike, the actor strike. I mean, and the venomous attack on working class poor people by the other side, and state-sanctioned violence when folks decide that they want to protest and utilize their democratic right to voice their concerns against systems of inequity. I think it's all sort of coming into a head. I mean, we have, a impeachment inquiry into the president. The president's son has been indicted. The former president has criminal charges. I mean, it's so much happening, and I'm like, where are we, and what's going to happen?
Right. I think we're missing all the big questions, paying attention to all these other things that are distractions. In the 18th century, Adam Smith conceptualized capitalism. In the 19th century, Karl Marx conceptualized, Marxism. And in the 20th century, I'm trying to think of the economists who conceptualized neoliberalism, right? We can conceptualize something different. There's no reason why we have to go back to these old systems and try to figure out how to fix them. We're living in a new era with new problems, with new connected world issues. And I'm really hoping that what comes out of this is our willingness to tackle the challenges with real structural change. When you start talking about, a care economy, when you start talking about democratic socialism, you're talking about a beloved economy.
Community, Martin Luther King.
Let's not be afraid to challenge ourselves to re-envision what the world can look like. I think
have we done that? Haven't we done that? I guess my question is also around, like, who is the right messenger? Karl Marx was an effective messenger. He was also the right color, right? Who are the messengers of this? Because we've done all of this imagining. We've done, right? Or have we not?
But we haven't sold it. We have not engaged. We haven't organized around it, right? Properly, right? I love Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders organized a certain group of people, mostly white people, right? Because Black Americans did not always understand that they were connected to what he was saying. And there were three things that may or may not have been the top priorities in the hood, right? Housing wasn't there, for example. And I'm not saying that as a criticism to him. I'm going back to what Rich said earlier about we have to start with our values. Mm-hmm. What are our shared values, our shared principles? And then what are the experiences of all of these people? You don't have to choose one. You can go to Appalachia and choose those folks. You can go to the Navajo Nation and talk to those folks. You can talk to the people in Detroit, California, but somehow it's got to start with a willingness to uplift the human experience and some shared values. And then how do we get there? It's not a short-term thing. I don't think it's a sprint. It's a marathon, but we have to start the race. And we've been so busy trying to figure out who's worse or who's better, Trump or Biden. And quite frankly, Biden is better than Trump, in my opinion, but he's also not addressing the needs of the folks I'm talking about because he's not aware of them. And so we can't make our hold justice to partisan politics, because partisan politics and justice are unrelated. And I hear people saying, well, you know what, the Supreme Court is not ruling on the kinds of things that will make a material difference in the lives of folks in the hood. when it does rule, it does not necessarily rule in the favor. And, we have not even decided what that is. So part of my, when you start talking about what is my life like, what am I going to do after 60, what am I going to do after I retire, I feel like a big part of what I'm trying to do is trying to work with other people to try to, first of all, listen, understand, define what our value systems are, and begin conceptualizing a changed America, a changed world. Because it's, if not us, who? If not now, when? I think that we can't keep on waiting for somebody else to have the ideas to save us. So, I really love, we've got, some wonderful scholarship and investment in Grace Lee Boggs and in James Boggs. So we have, sort of a roadmap for some aspects of this. And I know that you're doing a lot of work right now with a couple of projects. You want to talk about those projects that you're working on right now that help get us closer to this?
I think, yeah, sure. I think the project you're referring to is Freedom Dreams over by Mac and Willis area, and there's a group of nonprofits, people from the community, some of whom were born and raised in the community, and the vision is to create an eco village that includes housing based on universal design for people with and without disabilities. So it's based on universal design. And it's a belief that we can create a beloved community. And what's taking place at ECN, what's taking place at the Detroit Food Co-op, what's taking place in Feed and Freedom or Burwood or Hush House and many, many places across the city, people are asking, how do we create the beloved community? And then how do we converge to create the kind of leadership? Because the imagination is there. The imagination is growing. We have to go far beyond just satisfying grievances and ask, what is our vision, is where you started the conversation before. So I think what we're doing is, how do we transform ourselves? Because we've internalized these values that have been here for 500-600 years too. Yeah. And so we got a lot of work to start internally as well as in relationship to other people.
Well, you do. I was thinking about Freedom Dreams, but you also have done book clubs, you've done discussion groups, you've invited people in to assist in reteaching things. And I want to acknowledge you as unique in the role that you play in our community as a bridge builder, because you are one person who is trying to make sure that as you move your work forward, that you remain connected to the rest of us, so that that we are working more so on a common accord. And I really appreciate that about your role. What do you see as the future of that in our community?
I think the future is a lot of listening, a lot of knowing that my mentors are folks like yourself and folks like Myrtle and Kim and Coach and so many other folks around the city, Yusuf Shakur, and so many others. But I think we're at the stage where a lot has emerged over the last 10 years and 12 years. We need to converge those common collaboration into a force of people that have a vision, that are committed to transforming ourselves, creating the values we need and the principles we need to eventually influence power. We need to create much more power in the community, then influence power, and then take power in the city. And lastly, just to announce, so the Boggs Center is hosting the 60th anniversary of Malcolm X's speech, Message to the Grassroots, this November. And that's a conversation that emerged when Malcolm came here 60 years ago in 1963, because Jim and Grace Boggs, Reverend Clegg, Milton and Richard Henry, founders and activists and leaders of the Black Power movement, brought Malcolm here in a response to the contradictions that emerged after Martin Luther King's Great March here in 1963.
Now, what day is this?
It's going to be the weekend of November 11th, so I think it's the 10th and the 11th, that Friday and Saturday. Plans are still emerging. We'll also have study circles around that speech and listening sessions that we're encouraging people to participate. So if people go to the Boggs Center website, all of that will be up there, and we'll be sending it around through DCOH listserv and many other newsletters that we have a privilege to relate to and learn from.
The DCOH list there.
Me too. I hope that we can figure out how to collaborate, because the following weekend we're going to have a summit talking about the beloved community and really building a beloved economy is the theme. We've talked about this before. And so I really hope that we can figure out ways to make sure that people can be educated in both spaces and that we're connecting some of our learnings. But, I just admire you for the work that you're doing. I think it's super important. And I think it's solutionaries,
everything.
Yes. When you look at Detroit brought you Fordism. Detroit brought you a whole lot of great activism in the 1960s and 70s. There's no reason that Detroit cannot pave the way for how other economies can reimagine themselves, because we have so many innovative thinkers here. We have this all this land, right? And then we have these perceptions that people really should have freedom. I mean, when we talk about values, the one thing I can say is the grassroots, when you talk about message of the grassroots pretty much has the same values. It's as people ascend the political ladder that you start seeing changes. Now, you have to educate sometimes and uplift the values and help people see, but we teach classes on Can There Be Race Equity in Detroit at ECN? And I think the next one is going to be October 23rd at 6 p.m. And when we do that, people come and people aren't disagreeing with the values. They love the information. They need the information because they haven't been that information hasn't been shared. But people come together. I think Detroiters believe certain things on average that really make us unique.
That's right.
And I think that we have real opportunity here.
Rich Feldman, we want to thank you for coming on the podcast, and do come again. Not so long. It's been how many years we've been doing this? 4 years,
and we've actually talked about him coming on last year, and somehow it hasn't happened. But we're fans of Feldman.
So long, okay?
Well, I'm fans of you, and a quick, if I have 1 minute, the way that I've had a privilege of working with Donna and ECN was we met significantly during the community benefits struggle. We continued that relationship. Donna and ECN eventually hires Rukia to be an intern for Solutionaries, and Rukia now is doing so much other work beyond what that started at. And that's how Detroit movement built. It's built on relationships. It's built on commitment and staying there and never being satisfied with what we've done before, but asking deeper questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Rich. We appreciate you. Listen, if you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. And check out our website, authenticallydet.com. That's authenticallydet.com. All right, it's time for shout-outs. Donna, you have any shout-outs?
Yes, I do.
Great.
I would like to shout out Martha Reeves, who is our Marlo Stoudemire Eastside Legend honoree.
Yeah.
Catherine Kelly, who won the Maggie DeSantis Truth to Power Award. Edith Ford, our friend and partner, who won the Community Partner Award. Mark Covington, who won the Eastside Innovator Award. Linderick Bridges, who won the Willie Mae Gaskin Volunteer Award. Kari Johnson, who won the Willie Mae Gaskin Volunteer Award, and Shirley Jones, who also won the Willie Mae Gaskins Volunteer Award. These are great people who are making our community a better place.
Yeah. Rich, do you have any shout-outs?
I think in the spirit of the stand-up strike, I'll do a shout-out to the new leadership of the International United Auto Workers and what they've given to people who are on the line, and what they will be giving as the questions and challenges continue to deepen.
All right, that's going to do it for this
shout-outs,
episode.
Orlando?
Do I have shout-outs? I was trying to get away from it because I don't think I had any
He's tired.
at the forefront of my mind.
You know what? I'm going to shout out Orlando because Orlando has
My voice is gone.
Orlando has been co-hosting everything everywhere. So we appreciate the fact that you're able to support us.
Yeah. Shout out to everybody on the East Side. It's the
East
best
Side.
part. You know who I'll shout out? I'll shout out Chuck Stokes for an amazing career in broadcast journalism here in the city of Detroit, who was honored last night at the Detroit chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists gala at the Motor City Soundboard. It was beautiful. They roasted him real good. It's really hard to say anything bad about Chuck Stokes because he is genuinely such a nice guy, and to be in the room with journalists, but not just journalists, Black journalists and storytellers who are all in their way trying to amplify and tell the stories of folks that people like to often ignore was a treat. Phil Lewis was there, Donna, and we got to chop it up, so it was really cool. So shout out to the Black storytellers in the city and around the nation. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Authentically Detroit. We'll see you next time.